YouTubers to another episode in my Grammar Hero series. In this video, there's going to be 50 practice test questions that should closely mirror what you should expect to see in the general science subtest of both the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, that is the ASVAB, as well as the pre-screening Internet Delivered Computer Adapted Test, that is the PiCAT. In order to get the most from this video, of course, you'll want to pause the video after I read a test question, attempt to answer that test question on your own, and then resume playing the video to check your solution. Of course, one thing I want to mention is this. You really shouldn't be over studying for the ASVAB and PiCAT. Again, the arithmetic, reasoning, math knowledge, paragraph comprehension, and word knowledge subtest all make up your AFQT score. So you want to spend the bulk of your efforts preparing for these four subtests. That said, you may want to spend, a half a day to a day studying for general science and electronics information. In fact, if you go to my website, asvabapp.com, and you go to the study guide section, you'll see that I have a link to a free 4-page study guide. Should take you no more than a half a day to get through that. And if you read it from start to finish, you'll be exceptionally well prepared for this subtest of both the ASVAB and PiCAT. Finally, I quickly want to mention this. Please stop wasting your money and time on tutoring mobile apps or online boot camps. Truth be told, the vast majority of you are smart enough to pass this very simple test on your own, as long as you spend a few days to a month studying for it. Likewise, haven't evaluated many of these mobile apps and online boot camps. I've noticed that what they're doing is taking free content and putting it behind a paywall. And in that regard, many of the online boot camps and mobile apps are nothing more than scams. So, with all that finally being said, let's go ahead and get started with this video. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says, what are the two main gases that make up stars? So let's look at these. Ozone and ether doesn't make any sense. Nitrogen and oxygen are the two main gases that make up the Earth's atmosphere. Earth's atmosphere is about 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen, so that's not correct. Argon and carbon dioxide are also found in Earth's atmosphere. So, by process of elimination, we must conclude that stars are made up mostly of hydrogen and helium A. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says kinetic energy is energy that. So, the difference between potential and kinetic energy is that kinetic energy is energy of an object in motion, whereas potential energy is stored energy that an object that's not in motion has. So this one is going to be C. Kinetic energy is the energy that is possessed by a moving object. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says the temperature at which a substance's solid and liquid states exist in equilibrium is its. So again, ice is a solid, water is a liquid. When these two states are at equilibrium, that's called the A melting point. If you need more help studying for the general science subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT, check out my website, asvabapp.com. There you'll find a 4-page study guide for the general science subtest. It's completely free, and if you go through it from start to finish, you'll be well prepared for this subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says particles that orbit the nucleus of an atom are. So here's the structure of an atom. You can see that here's the nucleus. It's made up of protons, which are positively charged, and neutrons, which have no charge, and electrons, which have a negative charge, orbit the nucleus. So this one's going to be B, electrons. Again, if you need more help studying for the general science subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT, check out my website, asvabapp.com. There you'll find a free 4-page study guide that should help you prepare for this subtest, and it should only take you about half a day to get through that. So again, check out my website, asvabapp.com, if you want a free study guide for the general science subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says Earth is somewhat shielded from harmful ultraviolet radiation by the. So the Earth has an ozone layer that more or less filters out harmful ultraviolet radiation from the sun. So this one is C, ozone layer. Check out my website, asvabapp.com, if you want a free 4-page study guide for the general science subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT. Should take you about half a day to get through it. And if you go through it from start to finish, you should be well prepared for this subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says climate is. So the difference between weather and climate is that weather is in the short term, and those conditions can change within minutes or hours, whereas climate is how the atmosphere behaves over a very long period of time and space, and that can include over years and even decades. So climate is patterns of weather over long periods of time. B. ASVAB Podcast General Science Practice Test question says, which of the following is most responsible for oceanic tides? So, for the most part, the gravitational pull from the moon and to a lesser extent from the sun is what creates high tides and low tides. So, this one is going to be the orbit of the moon around the earth, which creates high tides and low tides due to its gravitational pull. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says the fact that the Earth is tilted as it revolves around the sun creates which phenomenon? So here's the Earth during summer in the northern hemisphere. As you can see, the northern hemisphere is receiving a large amount of direct energy from the sun. So again, uh, the tilt of the Earth as it revolves around the sun is chiefly responsible for how much energy the Earth receives at any given time, and that's how we get seasons or seasonality. D. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says, which of the following is not a state of matter? So, as you can see, there are three states of matter, notably solid, gas, and liquid. So, ether is obviously not one of those states of matter. If you need more help with the general science subtest on the ASVAB and PiCAT, check out my website, asvabapp.com. There, I have a free 4-page study guide that goes through the ins and outs of what you need to know for general science. And if you go through it fully, you'll be well prepared for this subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says, what is another name for the chemical formula NaCl? So this is sodium chloride, otherwise known as B salt. This is rock salt right here called halite. And how do we get table salt? Well, this halite is mined from the earth, and then this rock salt is made into granules, which we call table salt. So again, this is sodium chloride, otherwise known as B salt. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says, what is the main function of the body's lymphatic system? So the lymph system is commonly known as the body's immune system. Let's take a look at these one by one. Send and receive messages between the brain and different parts of the body. That's what the nervous system does. Deliver oxygen and nutrients to the body cells. That's what the circulatory system does. Take in oxygen from the air and expel carbon dioxide. That's the respiratory system. D, remove cellular debris and harmful substances. That is what the lymphatic system does. If you want a free study guide for the general science subtest of the ASVAB, check out my website, asvabapp.com. There, the study guide is 4 pages long, and if you read it from start to finish, you'll be exceptionally well prepared for this subtest of the ASVAB. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says, when your skin is cut and bleeding, what part of your blood works to clot the area and stop the bleeding? So when you're cut, your blood platelets form to stop the bleeding. So this one is going to be C platelets. If you need a study guide for the general science section of the ASVAB and PiCAT, check out my website, asvabapp.com. There, I have a free 4-page study guide for the general science subtest. And if you read it from start to finish, you'll be exceptionally well prepared for this subtest of both the ASVAB and PiCAT. So check it out when you get a chance. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says, which animal does not reproduce by spawning? So what does this word spawning or spawn mean? It means to release or deposit eggs. So we all know frogs deposit eggs when they're spawning, as do fish and birds, whereas horses give live birth to their offspring. So the correct answer to this one is D. Horses do not reproduce by spawning. This ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test question says the process by which a solid becomes a gas is known as. So we all know that when a gas becomes a liquid, that's called condensation. When a liquid becomes a gas, that's evaporation. When a solid becomes a gas, that's called sublimation. So this one is B sublimation. And when a gas becomes a solid, that's called deposition. If you need a study guide for the general science subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT, check out my website, asvabapp.com. There, I have a free 4-page study guide that covers information like this. And if you read through it from start to finish, you'll be exceptionally well prepared for this subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT. So please check it out when you get a chance. This ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test question says which animal in the food chain is warm blooded? So right away, you should be able to say that frogs and snakes are reptiles, and if you remember, reptiles are all cold-blooded. Surprisingly, flies are also cold-blooded. So the correct answer to this one is D. Hawks are warm-blooded. If you'd like a free study guide for the general science subtest of the ASVAB, check out my website, asvabapp.com. There, I have a free 4-page study guide. And if you read through it and work out these practice test questions, you'll be exceptionally well prepared for the general science subtest on the ASVAB and PiCAT. So please check that out when you get a chance. This ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test question says if a solution registers as a 3 on the pH scale, that solution is. So here's the pH scale. What you have to know is that a pH of 7 is considered neutral. Anything less than 7 is acidic. So, for example, the pH level of milk is a 6, therefore, it's slightly acidic. Anything above 7 is considered alkaline. So, for example, blood has a pH level of about 8, therefore it's slightly alkaline. So, to answer this one, if it has a 3 on the pH scale, then it is A, acidic. ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test questions as which animal undergoes metamorphosis. So, the definition of metamorphosis is a biological process where an organism undergoes a dramatic and distinct change in body structure. So, of these choices, you should know that a butterfly starts out as a caterpillar and then it becomes a butterfly. And as you can see, there is a very distinct difference in the two body structures there. So this one is going to be D, butterfly. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says the best definition of orogenesis is. So let's break this word down. Genesis means to create, and oro refers to mountains. So, in other words, the best definition of orogenesis is C, mountain building. If you want a free study guide for the general science section of the ASVAB and PiCAT, check out my website, asvabapp.com. There, under my study guide section, I have one for general science. It's about 4 pages long. And if you read it from start to finish, you will be well prepared for this section of the ASVAB and PiCAT. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says, what does AM and AM radio stand for? So if we look at these wave shapes down here, here's the two most common radio waves. We have AM or amplitude modulation. So this one is going to be B, as well as FM or frequency modulation. You should know both of those for the test. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says which system enables oxygen to reach an individual cell in the human body? So that's going to be the circulatory system, which is responsible for the transportation of oxygenated blood and other nutrients throughout the body. And it's made up of arteries, veins, capillaries, lungs, the heart, the brain, and the kidneys. If you want more help with the general science section of the ASVAB and PiCAT, check out my website, asvabapp.com. There you'll find a free study guide for the general science subtest. It's completely free and it's only about 4 pages long. If you read through it from start to finish, you will be exceptionally well prepared for this subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says the changing of any kind of matter from one form to another absorbs or releases. Given the answer choices, this one's pretty obvious that it's going to be D, energy. If it's helpful, think about it like this. Ice is a solid. As it melts, its energy increases and it becomes water. As water evaporates or boils, its energy increases again and it becomes a gas. So, again, this one is D, energy. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says marrow is a soft tissue found in. So this one is going to be B, bone. If you want more help studying for the general science subtest of both the ASVAB and PiCAT, check out my website, asvabab.com. There I have study guides, including one for general science. It's about 4 pages long and it's completely free. If you read through those 4 pages, you will be exceptionally well prepared for this subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says, what gas do most plants need to live? So for photosynthesis to occur, plants need sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. So this one's going to be D. As a result of photosynthesis, plants produce oxygen and sugars. So again, this one is D, carbon dioxide. If you want a free study guide for the general science subtest of the ASVAB, check out my website called asvabapp.com. There I have a free 4 page study guide. If you read through it from start to finish, you will be exceptionally well prepared for this subtest of the ASVAB and PiCAT. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says on a Fahrenheit thermometer, the boiling point of water at sea level is. So for the ASVAB and PiCAT, I'd be familiar with both the boiling and freezing point of water on the Kelvin, Celsius, and Fahrenheit scale. Water boils at 373 Kelvin, which is the same thing as 100 degrees Celsius, which is the same thing as 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So this one is going to be C. Likewise, water freezes at 273 Kelvin, 0 degrees Celsius, and 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So make sure you're familiar with those before you go and take this test. Chances are good you might see a question very similar to this one. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says the atomic number of an atom is the same as. So here's the atomic number for fluorine. You can see it's typically above the letter for the element. That refers to the number of protons in the nucleus of an atom, whereas this bottom number here refers to the mass of the atom itself. If you need a study guide for the general science section of the ASVAB and PiCAT, check out my website, asvabapp.com. If you go to my study guides, you'll see that I have a link to a free study guide that's about 4 pages long, and it will help you answer questions like this one on test day. It's completely free too. Check it out. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says, what is the correct order of the water cycle? So the water cycle always starts with a pool of water being heated up. Number one here for A and B says water vapor cools. That is not correct, so we can go ahead and eliminate both of those. Number two says precipitation occurs. Precipitation occurs later in the water cycle, so we know that's not correct. And by process of elimination, we know D is correct. Again, sunlight heats up pond water, it evaporates, and then it cools and condenses, and then we have precipitation. So this one is D53142. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says solubility can be defined as. Here's the technical definition. Solubility is a chemical property referring to the ability of a substance, known as the solute, to dissolve in a solvent to form a homogeneous solution. In other words, it's the extent to which a substance dissolves in a solvent. B. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says friction is a force that. Here's the definition. It's the opposing force which acts in the opposite direction of movement. Again, we have motion going this way, friction is going that way. So, in other words, it opposes motion between forces. C. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says, what is an example of kinetic energy? So, kinetic energy is energy of motion. In other words, an object is already in motion, whereas potential energy is stored energy. An object has potential to be in motion, but it's not yet in motion. And if we look through our answer choices, we have a pendulum swinging. So, in other words, that pendulum is in motion. So, this one is going to be D. All these other options have potential energy. ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says water droplets forming on the inside of a cold windshield is an example of. The air has water vapor in it. As that water vapor comes in contact with a cold surface, that water vapor begins to condense into water. So this one is going to be decondensation. Think about a cold glass sitting in a room. Generally speaking, water droplets start forming on the outside of that glass because the water vapor is condensing into water droplets. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says which of the following will result in a chemical reaction? A. Mixing salt and water. B. Heating candle wax. C. Melting ice to water. D. Adding milk to water. So, first, let me say this: when you melt ice to water, its chemical structure does not change. Likewise, when you heat candle wax, although it changes from a solid to sort of a liquid, its chemical structure does not change. Milk and water do not interact with each other, but when you mix salt and water, you actually create a hydrolysis reaction and it changes the pH levels of the water in doing so. So this one is A, mixing salt and water. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says, which of the following is a renewable resource? So by definition, a renewable resource is a source that is not depleted when it's used to create energy. If we look through our answer choices, you should recognize that coal, natural gas, and oil are all fossil fuels. As it happens, fossil fuels are depleted whenever they're used to create energy, whereas we can actually use water to create energy without using any of the water itself. So, for instance, in a hydroelectric dam, water flows through the dam, it spins a turbine, which is then used to generate energy. None of the water itself is used up in that process. So, this one is B, water as a renewable resource. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says the tympanic membranes are also known as. Well, as it happens, the tympanic membrane is right here. You may recognize that as your eardrum. So, tympanic membrane is just the medical term for your eardrum. C. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says when sodium atoms form sodium ions, they share protons, lose electrons, gain neutrons, gain electrons. So, whenever an atom forms an ion, an element must gain or lose an electron. So, these answer choices that involve protons and neutrons are not correct. In the case of a sodium atom, whenever it forms a sodium ion, it loses its outer electron. So, the correct answer to this one is B, loses electrons. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says which of these is the best explanation of how a rock becomes smooth and rounded? A, it was exposed to the sun for a long time. That would only change its color. B, it was crushed. That would just make it smaller, not necessarily smooth and rounded. C, it was exposed to heavy winds occasionally. That's how rock becomes sand, and this word occasionally makes this one wrong. D, it was in a stream for a long time. Well, that's how a rock would become smooth and rounded. So this one is going to be D. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says, what is the symbol for a hydroxyl ion? Thankfully enough, these chemical names usually tell you what compounds are in them. In this case, we have one hydrogen and one oxygen compound. And if we look through our answer choices, we can see that this just has hydrogen. This has oxygen and hydrogen. This one has two hydrogens, and this one has three hydrogens. So the correct answer to this one is B. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says the chemical formula of a compound describes the elements the compounds contain. And, well, this one's going to be B, the ratio of the elements in the compound. If you take a look, you can see that H2O describes the fact that water has two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says this: to be classified as an organic substance, a substance must contain carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen. So the answer to this one is A. Organic substances all contain carbon. Inorganic substances lack carbon. So that is that one. This ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test question says when a lizard grows a tail to replace one that was lost, the process is called A, amputation, B, mitosis, C, chrysalis, D, regeneration. So this one is going to be D, regeneration. Uh, as far as humans are concerned, there's only one thing that we can replace, and that's skin to cover a wound. Similarly, lobsters can regrow their claws through regeneration if they lose one of their claws. This ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test question says which element has no neutrons in the nucleus of its atom? So this is kind of a trick question. You just have to remember that in almost every element, protons are always accompanied by neutrons, and the only exception to that is for hydrogen. This ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test question says a human skin cell divides by replication, meiosis, mitosis, mitochondria. So we know mitochondria is a part of a cell. That's not correct. Replication also isn't correct. So these two things, meiosis and mitosis, are very similar. Mitosis is in reference to cellular reproduction, whereas meiosis is in reference to the reproduction of chromosomes. So the correct answer to this one is D, mitosis. This ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test question says an astronomical body that revolves around a larger body is called. This is the definition of B, a satellite. And the easiest way to remember this one is to think about the moon in relation to the Earth. The moon, as a matter of fact, is considered a satellite of the Earth. This ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test question says if you place bean seeds between moist paper towels and watch the stem and leaves appear, you will see a demonstration of. Well, this is a process called germination. So, whenever a seed becomes a seedling, that is the germination process. So, this one is going to be B. This ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test question says how many atoms are in a single molecule of water, that is H2O. So let's look at H2O very quickly. So this two means we have two hydrogen atoms. There's not a one here, but generally when there's no number here, that means you have one of those atoms. And in this case, we have one oxygen atom. So in total, we have one, two, three uh, atoms and a single molecule of water. That is, we have two hydrogen and one oxygen atoms. This ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test question says the filament in an electric light bulb is made from A, carbon, B, tungsten, C, copper, D, steel. So here's the parts of a light bulb. You can see that you have your glass mount, support wires, and then in between the two support wires, you have a piece of tungsten filament. So this one is going to be B, tungsten. This ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test question says choking is prevented by A, the diaphragm remaining down, B, vibration of the vocal cords, C, esophagus moving the food, D, epiglottis covering the voice box. So this one's going to be D, the epiglottis covering the voice box. You can see in this diagram the epiglottis is right here. It's a fold of skin that is in use when you're eating that prevents food from going down your trachea and into your lungs. Instead, it redirects the food to your stomach. All right, so this one is epiglottis. This ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test question says, what are the two main gases that make up stars? So let's look at these. Ozone and ether doesn't make any sense. Nitrogen and oxygen are the two main gases that make up the Earth's atmosphere. Earth's atmosphere is about 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. So that's not correct. Argon and carbon dioxide are also found in Earth's atmosphere. So by process of elimination, we must conclude that stars are made up mostly of hydrogen and helium A. This ASVAB PiCAT general science practice test question says which of the following is not a renewable source of energy. So let's quickly define renewable source of energy. It's energy from a source that is not depleted when used, such as wind or solar power. So let's take a look at D, natural gas. There's a very limited supply of natural gas on the earth. And once you use natural gas, it's gone forever. Whereas all these other ones, geothermal, solar, and hydroelectric, are all not depleted when you use them. So this one is D, natural gas. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says in humans, regeneration is limited to A, wounds, B, limbs, C, brain cells, D, teeth. Once you get your adult teeth, you can't regrow them. Similarly, once you lose brain cells, you can't get those back. B, as far as I know, you can't regrow limbs. That's not something that we can currently do. And A, wounds. Well, if you get a wound up to a certain size, you can regrow your skin over the top of that wound. So this one is A, wounds. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says, which term describes a liquid's resistance to flow? Well, that is the definition of D, viscosity. The way I like to remember this one is to think about oil. When you buy oil, they come with specific weights. For instance, a common type of oil is 5W30. This 5 describes how quickly the oil flows when it's cold out. This 30 describes how quickly the oil flows when the engine is at normal operating temperature, so viscosity. This ASVAB PiCAT General Science Practice Test question says the 7 levels of taxonomic classification from general to specific are. So there's a mnemonic device you can use to memorize this one pretty easily. It's King Philip came over for good soup. All right, so that's going to be kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Again, as long as you can remember the phrase King Philip came over for good soup, you should be able to easily answer this one. And if you need more help studying for the general science subtest of the ASVAB, check out my website, asvabapp.com. There you'll find a link to a free 4-page study guide. And if you go through it from start to finish, that should only take you a couple of hours. You'll be well prepared for this subtest of the ASVAB.